So you've been training jiu-jitsu for a while. You show up, you roll, you do all the right things, and you train hard. But you can't help but think that you're not progressing like you should. This is only getting you frustrated and more confused. And worst of all, you're starting to wonder, is it just me? Fact of the matter is, it's not you, but it probably is your training method. Today, we're going to walk through together 9 clear signs that your jiu-jitsu training system is completely broken and how to start fixing it fast. So you can actually get the results you're after, winning that next tournament, and submitting your gym nemesis, Rob, who's 35 and works the desk at IT, but continues to just fucking wrist lock you all the time. And we know how annoying that is. Sign number 1, you just feel like you're collecting random moves that you're just going to forget anyway. If your move selection looks like a buffet of just random shit all put together, maybe you like arm bars from guard, but then you also use berimbolas all the time, and you're a crab ride aficionado, then you don't mind a toe hold from every single position you can find one, it's likely that you have a very randomized mode of moving in the training room, and you've got a bunch of random moves that don't sit well together. And worse, even though you can figure out how these moves work, you can barely hit any of them live. What you're doing is the traditional method of just collecting random shit and trying to put it together and seeing what happens. And as you can probably tell through me explaining it and your experience, there's no system of order. You're just collecting random shit and hoping that somehow it weaves itself nicely into this neat little tapestry, but you finish every single round not having a clue what went wrong, what went well, or how you could even fix it in the first place. This is typically due to the fact that most gyms are going to teach you one random move at the start, something else that's not even related whatsoever, and then a third and final unrelated move. And if your coach isn't teaching you a system of operations, then you're going to be one of those random one-trick ponies that your training partners always figure out and end up most rounds in stalemate because you've got a random collection of shit that just doesn't work together. Sign number 2, you do not have a focus. You walk into class, you get warmed up, maybe you do a couple of these ones, and you hope to God that your instructor has done some research and they're going to teach you something useful for today. You get through the random dribble that they prepared and you're rolling, but there's no clear focus, no purpose, and no mission for what your role should be accomplishing. You feel like you're just training, maybe even just to work out or get a sweat out or do some exercise. And that's a bit of a red flag because the best of the best always have a goal for their roles. They don't just train. They actually train with intention. I actually learnt this the most in my time personal training. There were people who would just come in and flap about and not really go that hard, and they'd try and do this exercise and maybe a little bit of this and maybe a little bit of that and maybe some bicep curls to finish off. And then there were those who'd bust out the chalk, the spreadsheet, the Google Sheets program. They'd turn the death metal on and they'd lift until they couldn't lift anymore. But it was regimented, it was purposeful, it had intention, and the difference between the results of those two people are staggering. Just showing up and just training with no intention and no plan is about the worst advice you can follow. Even if you don't know how to implement said plan, come to training with a focus. Whether it be half guard, takedowns, pins, guard retention, it doesn't matter what it is, and try your best to implement it. I guarantee you'll get more results out of that session than you did without. Sign number 3, you learn, you forget, you repeat the same process. You do learn techniques, but a week later they're completely gone out of your mind. You forget the details and you sure as fuck can't remember how to set it up. This is a retention issue, and it's usually caused by a lack of context for the moves that you are learning. See, you're learning puzzle pieces, but you don't have a clear picture of the puzzle in the box that you're meant to be focusing on. Most of the time, coaches are pretty lazy, to be fair. They don't take the time to explain the context of how or why the move would actually work. They just explain to you what. So you're just left trying to memorize every single detail that you can, but as soon as you're trying to finish cramming that information into your head, you're in a live situation with a big fat guy on top of you, and that's not a good learning methodology. Shift your focus as best as you can to the how and the why the moves you're using will actually work in certain situations. Then you'll actually remember and retain that information, because each time you end up in the situation, you'll know how and why that move actually works, and it'll jog your memory for you. And if you can't be fucked figuring all of that stuff out for yourself, you want it mapped out for you in a step-by-step process that you can just follow along weekly, there's going to be a link down below. Only if you want to. But that leads me to sign number 4. Your game has no identity. If someone asked you what kind of jiu-jitsu is your jiu-jitsu, would you even have an answer? If your opponents tried to describe your game and they couldn't come up with anything, it's likely that you can't come up with anything for yourself either. And if your game has no identity, it has no foundation, has no spine, which means that you're likely just throwing a bunch of shit together and not training in the correct manner. The people that visit my gym from all over the world always tell us at the end of every lesson, it feels like everybody was using a similar set of moves. Now, obviously the white belts aren't as successful as the black belts in the application of those moves, but there's a clear identity for high percentage techniques focusing on using attacks at the upper and the lower body. There's a clear focus on using positional dominance to exhaust our training partner so that we can force submissions at the end of the round. And you're going to experience that from the very beginners all the way up to the most experienced. There's a clear identity there. There's a focus. There's an intention. Most of us who are applying the training methodology day in, day out, we know exactly where we're headed. And it's very tough to beat those people, which leads me into point number 5. You feel lost during your training. You escape one position and then you use so much energy and so much effort that you completely freeze and forget what to do next. You're not sure where to go and you're stuck reacting instead of leading the dance. This usually means you haven't mapped out a lot of transitions and you haven't been training in a sequential manner. Like I said at the start of the video, most gyms just put 3 random techniques before you and make you figure out the links between those moves. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want an 18-year-old relationship coach, so why are we expecting white and blue belts to put the moves together for themselves? It just doesn't make any sense. You could figure it out through trial and error over a decade-long training plan, but wouldn't you rather stand on the shoulders of giants and figure out solutions to problems that took other people years to figure out in a matter of weeks? That makes more sense to me. If you do have to do it on your own, you have to figure out ways through action and a reaction method. Often, this is easiest to figure out for your best moves. Let's say you're a DAS specialist and they throw their back to the mat. You now know that that is a viable defense for your favorite attack. When they throw their back to the mat, you know you can take top position. You don't have to sell out on the DAS and then keep burning your arms out, for instance. Or let's say you're in a collar tie situation, you reach down for a leg and they take their leg away. Trying to reach further for that leg is an exercise in futility, and if you keep doing it, you're going to end up in a bad position. But if you recognize it in an action-reaction method, I reach down for the leg, they sprawl the leg back, their head comes forwards, I snap them down. Now you've got a reliable system of action-reaction. Now you've got a game plan for at least one of your moves, and you can start to develop that process through all of your moves. Sign number 6, you are exhausted all of the time. Every round feels like a war, feels like a scramble, it feels like absolute chaos. You're gassed out after a few minutes, even against the lower guys that you shouldn't be. And this is not a cardio issue. It's a strategy issue, and you're likely using strength to compensate for your lack of technique and your lack of game plan. Every student I've coached in my community has come to me with some sort of problem like this, and they falsely assumed that it was cardio that was holding them back. Until I watched their training footage and their match footage, and I realized that everything was at 1,000%. The death grips were off the charts, and they were trying to use speed, explosivity, and strength to overcome strategy. Every movement was jittery, unfocused, sporadic, until they end up giving up about halfway through the round because they're completely exhausted. After a few weeks of structured and directed training, however, they're starting to see the moves come at them at a much slower rate because we've lowered their training intensity. Instead of going at 100%, training at 60% allows you to get a better perspective of what's actually going on. And it gives you less wear and tear on your body, more time to make the correct decision for the technical side of things, not the attribute side of things. And you're actually using the moves the way that they're designed to be used, instead of just gritting and trying to overcome with strength. You can't just expect to wing things in a training round and not have your nervous system completely freak out, send you into flight or fight, and send your heart rate to the moon. Think about how exhausting it was mentally and physically when you first drove a car. All the possible decisions, all the speed, all the angle of the steering wheel, whether you should change gears or not hitting other cars, your mum freaking the fuck out in the front seat, losing her mind every 5 minutes because you're this close to the gutter. Ironic. Then you finally get some lessons, you get a structure, you get a strategy, you get some tools to be able to use with deliberate practice and some key focuses, and now you drive on autopilot without even thinking about it, doing all those things seamlessly. Turning the intensity down a notch and not relying on your strength, a really good strategy. Sign number 7, your training is boring. You keep showing up, but deep down, you're just getting sick of training. When jiu-jitsu was new, it was fun. It was interesting, and no two roles were alike. But now, it's the same lesson, the same partners, day in, day out, and you're basically just using it for exercise. But let me ask you this. How boring would your training be if you had a focus that you were implementing each and every single day, and you knew that focus was going to force you to progress? You knew it was going to force you to be creative so that you didn't have to rely on outdated, boring teaching in a randomized fashion, where you actually had targets to hit and then you could measure if you were progressing or not, knowing that when you did hit those targets, you were building a skill set that was reliable so that you could go to open mats in other gyms and actually succeed against random training partners, that you became well-rounded so that if you ended up on your back, you didn't have to spend the entire round there gassing out and freaking out, and that you weren't just focused on winning training rounds, but that you were focused on developing skills in an enjoyable manner, and that you actually felt like you were developing every single time you stepped on the mats. If you don't have that in your training, then it's time to start focusing on that and developing a system that you can implement. Some days I get into the gym after a hard morning session and I decide that my plan for that day isn't really going to be feasible for how I'm feeling at the moment. So I scrap the plan, but then I decide to work on my defense. I set up another plan in its place, and working on my defense has given me some of the most enjoyable sessions I've ever had. So always having a plan is a great idea. It kills boredom and it makes sure that you're progressing. Sign number 8, you're afraid to compete. You want to test yourself, but a part of you is terrified. Not of losing, but realizing your training has done nothing to prepare you against other people who are training correctly. Now, not everybody competes. Not everybody has to compete. I'm of the opinion that you should do it at least once, just to give it a go. But you don't have to, admittedly. Although, that being said, if you're terrified to compete, then it's likely your training isn't cutting it. Maybe you've shown up to a couple of those open mats and been terribly surprised at how bad your skills actually are. That tells me you need to analyze what you're doing day in, day out in the training room and finding the common themes of exactly where you're getting stuck and doubling down on those areas so you can prevent it in the future. Maybe the missing key is new information, new perspective, or a new video that you haven't watched. One of the hardest things about jiu-jitsu, or anything for that matter, is finding what specific solution is going to be for your specific problem. Most white and blue belts make the false assessment that it's a brand new submission that's going to solve all their problems. I'll give you a hint. It's not. If you just fixate on positional dominance ahead of your submission, you'd likely see your submission finish rate skyrocket. But that's the boring answer, and it comes with a lot of planning and a lot of focus that not a lot of people are willing to do. And that's why most people aren't really that good at the sport. They'd rather just throw Hail Mary submissions at people and see what happens. Sign number 9, you're thinking about quitting training. This is the worst one, where something that used to give you a lot of passion turns into a bit of resentment and you don't know why you're going anymore. Now, this one isn't a practical takeaway. It's more of a mental shift or a challenge. Firstly, the only way you guarantee you stay where you're currently at is if you quit. So if that's what you want, then no one can stop you. I'm willing to bet that you wouldn't be watching this video if you did want to quit. You obviously want to get better, because that's what this channel's about. The challenge is to take everything I've outlined in this video and have a genuine attempt at applying it. The focus, the game planning, the structure, trying to figure out action, reaction of all your training moves, not just focusing on submissions, actually trying to figure out a plan. And when your training gets considerably better, more enjoyable, more focused, more disciplined, more progress oriented, then you won't even be thinking about stopping. You'll be thinking about training instead of just watching Netflix and doom scrolling, because nobody quits something that they're enjoying and they're progressing at each and every single time they do it. It's just not going to happen. So there you have it. There are the 9 signs that your training needs a massive overhaul and some ways to be able to achieve that so you can actually enjoy yourself and find the progress on the mats that you're after. Thanks for watching. And if you like this video, YouTube's a smart cookie. And I stole this from James Smith. So if you've watched his videos, you know where I got it from. But he's a smart cookie as well. And he told me to tell you that YouTube thinks that you're going to like this video. So go and watch that bad boy.